The night Milo Everhart thought he was finally getting his second chance was the same night he discovered he had never been loved the way he believed. For 3 years, Milo had held on to one promise: that someday he and Julian would leave everything behind and build a quiet life together. Milo was not rich, powerful, or someone people noticed when he entered a room. He restored damaged paintings for a living, spending his days bringing forgotten things back to their original beauty. But lately, he felt like he was becoming one of those forgotten things himself. His savings were gone, his apartment lease was ending, and the person he trusted most had promised that one final escape would fix everything. "Just trust me," Julian had whispered. "Tomorrow, we start over." Milo wanted to believe him. He needed to believe him, because losing Julian meant losing the last person he thought had chosen him. The car ride that night was supposed to be the beginning of a new life. Instead, it became the moment everything he knew collapsed. Milo sat in the back seat holding a small suitcase filled with everything he could not bear to leave behind. A few clothes, his old sketchbook, a photograph of the first painting he ever restored. He watched the city lights disappear outside the window and tried to ignore the strange feeling in his chest. Something was wrong. Julian had not answered his questions. The driver did not speak. And when Milo finally saw where they were going, his heart sank. The car stopped in front of a massive mansion surrounded by tall iron gates and perfectly trimmed gardens. This was not a small town where they could disappear. This was a place that looked like it belonged to someone who never had to worry about losing anything. Milo stepped out slowly. "Where is Julian?" he asked. The driver only lowered his eyes. "Mr. Ashford is waiting inside." Milo froze. Who was Mr. Ashford? Before the driver could answer, the front doors opened. A man walked toward him, not with the cold arrogance Milo expected from someone who lived in a mansion like this, but with a calm expression that made the entire world around him feel quieter. Lucian Ashford did not look surprised to see him. That was the part Milo could not understand. Lucian already knew his name. "Milo Everhart," he said softly. "You must be confused." Milo tightened his grip on his suitcase. "You know who I am?" Lucian looked at him for a long moment, then did something Milo never expected. He took off his coat and placed it over Milo's shoulders. "You're freezing," Lucian said. "Come inside first. Then I'll explain everything." It was such a simple gesture, but Milo almost forgot how to react. He had spent the last hour preparing himself for anger, humiliation, or rejection. He had not prepared for kindness. Inside the mansion, the truth finally came out. Julian had not planned a romantic escape. He had made a desperate deal after losing a large amount of money through gambling. Milo was not brought here because Julian loved him. He was brought here because Julian believed Milo was something he could offer in exchange for clearing his debt. The words felt heavier than any physical object Milo had ever carried. He stared at the floor, trying not to let Lucian see how deeply it hurt. "So that's what I am?" Milo asked quietly. "A payment?" Lucian's expression changed for the first time. The powerful man who seemed untouchable suddenly looked almost angry, but not at Milo. At the situation. "No," Lucian said firmly. "You are not a payment." Milo looked up. "Then why am I here?" Lucian was silent for a moment. Then he answered honestly. "Because someone brought you to my door believing you had no choice. I want you to know that you do." Those words were different from anything Milo had heard all night. Lucian did not tell him what to do. He did not demand gratitude. He simply gave him something Milo had almost forgotten he still had. A choice. Milo still did not trust him. How could he? His entire future had changed in a single car ride. But for the first time that night, he felt like someone saw him as a person instead of a problem to solve. As Milo stood in the grand hallway of a stranger's mansion, wearing a coat that was not his and holding a suitcase that suddenly felt too heavy, he realized something impossible. The man he feared might be the first person who had actually protected him. And the most dangerous question entered his mind. Why did Lucian Ashford already know his name before they had ever met? The mansion felt too large for Milo Everhart. Every hallway seemed longer than the last. Every piece of furniture looked like it belonged in a museum instead of a home. He had spent the night in a guest room bigger than his entire apartment, but sleep never came easily. Every time he closed his eyes, he remembered Julian's promise. "We are running away together. We are starting over." Now those words felt like a cruel joke. Milo woke up the next morning still wearing the same uncertainty he carried through the gates. He did not know if Lucian Ashford was his enemy, his rescuer, or simply another powerful man who believed he could control his life. When Milo entered the dining room, he expected silence and distance. Instead, he found Lucian already there, reviewing documents beside a cup of untouched coffee. The man looked exactly like the world described him, the founder of Ashford Holdings, a billionaire known for transforming struggling companies into global brands. Someone whose decisions could change entire industries. But then Milo noticed something strange. Lucian was not eating. He was not even looking at the expensive breakfast prepared in front of him. He was reading a restoration report about a damaged painting hanging in the mansion. Milo stopped. "You had someone examine that." Lucian looked up. "You recognized it?" Milo stepped closer, forgetting his caution for a moment. "It is an early 19th century landscape. The previous owner probably tried to repair the damage himself. The materials do not match the original work." Lucian studied him quietly. "Most people only see an old painting." Milo looked at the artwork. "Most people do not know what they are looking at." For a second, Lucian almost smiled. It was small, but Milo noticed. "You are an artist," Lucian said. Milo shook his head. "A restorer. There is a difference." "What is the difference?" Milo answered without hesitation. "An artist creates something new. A restorer listens to what was already there and helps it survive." That answer stayed with Lucian longer than Milo expected. Later that morning, Milo prepared to leave. He refused to remain in the mansion like a prisoner, even if Lucian had not treated him that way. But when he reached the front entrance, he found his old apartment key sitting on the table beside his suitcase. Lucian had already arranged transportation, contacted his landlord, and secured temporary housing options. Milo stared at him. "Why are you doing this?" Lucian stood near the window, looking out over the property. "Because you should not have to choose between staying here and having nowhere else to go." Milo narrowed his eyes. "You do not even know me." "No," Lucian admitted. "But I know what it feels like when someone else decides your future without asking what you want." The answer surprised Milo. There was something in Lucian's voice that did not sound like sympathy. It sounded like experience. For the first time, Milo saw a crack in the perfect image of the powerful businessman. Lucian Ashford was not simply a man who had everything. He was someone who understood what it meant to lose control. Before Milo could respond, Lucian's assistant entered with urgent news. The situation involving Julian had already reached people in their business circle. Rumors were spreading that Lucian had accepted a person as part of a private arrangement. Milo felt his stomach tighten. He knew what people would think. That he was here because he had been bought. That he was another possession belonging to a wealthy man. Lucian immediately noticed the change in Milo's expression. "You do not need to explain yourself to anyone," Lucian said. Milo gave a quiet laugh. "That is easy for you to say. Everyone knows your name. No one knows mine." Lucian looked at him carefully. "Then they will learn." Milo looked confused. "What does that mean?" Lucian walked toward the desk and picked up a folder. Inside was a proposal for a new restoration project at one of Ashford Holdings' most important galleries. Milo recognized the collection immediately. It contained rare damaged pieces that had been ignored for years. "I want you to lead the restoration team," Lucian said. Milo stared at the document. "You are offering me a job?" "I am offering you a chance to stand somewhere because of your ability, not because of what someone did to you." Milo did not know what to say. No one had looked at him that way in a long time. Not as someone broken, not as someone who needed saving, as someone valuable. But accepting Lucian's offer meant entering his world. It meant being connected to the man everyone watched. It meant people would start asking questions. Milo closed the folder slowly. "Why me?" Lucian answered immediately. "Because when everyone else sees something damaged, you see something worth restoring." The words hit harder than Milo expected. For the first time since arriving at the mansion, he did not feel like he was waiting for his life to be decided by someone else. He felt like he had a choice. Milo agreed to stay temporarily and take the project. It was not trust yet. It was not forgiveness. But it was a beginning. As Milo walked through the mansion later that day, he realized something had changed. Lucian Ashford was still powerful, still intimidating, still a man surrounded by people who feared disappointing him. But with Milo, he was different. He listened. He asked. He noticed. And that made Milo wonder about the one question he could not ignore anymore. If Lucian did not see him as a debt to be settled, then what exactly did this powerful man see when he looked at him? The first thing Milo Everhart noticed about working at Ashford Holdings was that everyone already had an opinion about him. Some people looked curious. Some looked suspicious. A few looked at him like they had already decided he did not belong. Milo understood why. He had arrived at one of the most powerful companies in the country with no famous family name, no business connections, and no expensive suit. He was just a restoration artist carrying a folder of sketches and a lifetime of experience seeing beauty where others saw damage. But this time, he was not trying to restore an old painting. He was trying to prove that he was more than the circumstances that brought him there. The gallery project became the center of Milo's days. Every morning, he arrived early, studied each damaged piece carefully, and worked quietly while everyone else rushed around him. At first, the employees treated him like a temporary guest. They whispered that Lucian Ashford had given him special treatment because of the strange situation involving Julian. Milo heard every word, but he refused to let it change his work. He had spent years rebuilding forgotten artwork. He knew patience. He knew that real value did not disappear just because people failed to see it. One afternoon, Milo was examining a centuries-old painting when a group of executives entered the gallery. They were discussing the collection's future, and one of them glanced at Milo's notes with a doubtful expression. "Are we really letting someone with no corporate background handle pieces worth millions?" the man asked. Milo stayed silent. He was used to defending his work, but he did not want to sound desperate for approval. Before he could answer, Lucian entered the room. The entire atmosphere changed instantly. People straightened their posture. Conversations stopped. Lucian Ashford had that effect on everyone. He was the man whose signature could approve billion-dollar decisions. The man whose reputation made competitors think twice. But instead of addressing the executives first, Lucian walked directly to Milo's table. "What did you find?" he asked. Milo looked surprised. "You want my opinion before theirs?" Lucian glanced at the painting. "I asked you because you are the person who understands it." That simple sentence silenced the room. Milo explained his discovery. The damage was not random. The previous restoration attempt had hidden the original artist's technique, and correcting it would reveal details that could completely change the value of the piece. The executives listened carefully. The same people who had doubted him moments earlier were now looking at him differently. Lucian did not interrupt. He did not take credit. He simply stood beside Milo and let him speak. After the meeting ended, Milo looked at him. "You did not have to do that." Lucian raised an eyebrow. "Do what?" "Make everyone listen." Lucian's expression softened slightly. "I did not make them listen. I reminded them to." Milo realized something in that moment. Lucian treated him differently because he respected him, not because he felt responsible for him, not because he pitied him. That difference mattered. Later that evening, Milo returned to the mansion with a small box of restoration tools. He found Lucian alone in the library, no assistants, no meetings, no endless calls. Just a man sitting quietly in a room filled with books. "You work late every night," Milo said. Lucian looked up. "So do you." Milo smiled slightly. "I have an excuse. Paintings cannot fix themselves." For a rare moment, Lucian laughed. It was quiet and unexpected. Milo had never heard it before. The man everyone described as impossible to read suddenly seemed human. Their conversation continued longer than either expected. Milo learned that Lucian remembered details about every employee in his company, but rarely allowed anyone to know details about him. Lucian learned that Milo still carried the small sketchbook from his first year as an artist because it reminded him why he started. They were different in every possible way, but somehow they understood each other. The next morning, Milo received an invitation to a private gallery event hosted by Ashford Holdings. He assumed it was another business obligation until he saw the guest list. His name was written beside Lucian's, not as an assistant, not as a temporary worker, as the featured restoration artist. Milo stared at the invitation, unsure what to think. When he asked Lucian about it, Lucian simply said, "You earned your place there." Milo wanted to believe him. He really did. But before he could respond, Lucian's assistant quietly handed him another document. A message had arrived from Julian's lawyer. The past Milo was trying to escape had found a way back into his life. Milo looked at the paper, then at Lucian. For the first time, he did not feel completely alone. But he also knew that whatever came next would test whether this new trust between them was strong enough to survive the truth waiting ahead. The message from Julian's lawyer changed everything. Until that moment, Milo Everhart had started to believe that the past was finally losing its hold on him. He had a place to work. He had a chance to rebuild his career. And, most unexpectedly, he had someone who treated him like he mattered. But the moment Milo opened the document, he felt that fragile sense of peace disappear. Julian was claiming that Milo had willingly agreed to the arrangement that brought him to Lucian Ashford's mansion. According to the statement, Milo had known about the financial agreement and chosen to stay. It was a lie. A carefully written version of events that made Milo look like someone chasing wealth instead of someone who had been betrayed. Milo read the words again and again, feeling the same helplessness he had felt the night he arrived at the mansion. For years, he had worked quietly because he believed his actions would speak louder than rumors. But rumors moved faster than truth. The upcoming Ashford Gallery event suddenly felt different. It was no longer just an opportunity to show his work. It was a place where people would decide who Milo Everhart was before he even spoke. Lucian noticed the change immediately. He always noticed things about Milo that others missed. The way he became quieter when he was worried. The way he held his sketchbook tighter when he felt judged. The way he pretended he was fine because he did not want anyone to carry his problems. "You are thinking about leaving?" Lucian said one evening. Milo looked up from his notes. "Maybe I should." Lucian's expression remained calm, but something in his eyes changed. "Why?" Milo hesitated. "Because everyone keeps looking at me like I do not belong here. Because your name is protecting me from consequences that should be mine." Lucian stepped closer, but his voice stayed gentle. "Milo, there is a difference between accepting help and losing yourself." Those words stayed with him. The night of the gallery event arrived, and the room was filled with influential guests, investors, and critics. Everyone knew Lucian Ashford. They knew his reputation. They knew his power. But most of them did not know Milo. And some of them had already decided what story they wanted to believe. Whispers followed him as he walked through the room. They said he was only there because of Lucian. They questioned his talent. They wondered what someone like him could possibly contribute to a collection worth millions. Milo felt the old instinct to disappear. Then the presentation began. Instead of standing beside Lucian in the background, Milo was invited to speak about the restoration process. He stepped forward and explained the history behind the artwork, the mistakes previous restorers had made, and the details that had been hidden for decades. Slowly, the room changed. People stopped judging him and started listening. But one guest interrupted. "Interesting story," the man said. "Although I imagine it is easier to impress people when Mr. Ashford is standing behind you." The room became quiet. Milo prepared himself to answer, but Lucian spoke first. "You are mistaken." Everyone turned toward him. Lucian rarely raised his voice, but everyone listened when he spoke. "I did not bring Milo here because I needed someone to support my reputation. I invited him because his work improved mine." The room fell silent. Lucian looked directly at Milo, not at the audience. "His talent existed before my company ever recognized it." It was not a dramatic speech. It was not a performance. It was simply the truth. And somehow that made it more powerful. Milo felt something shift inside him. Lucian was not defending him because he felt guilty. He was defending him because he believed in him. Later that night, Milo found Lucian outside on the balcony overlooking the city. "You did not have to say those things," Milo said. Lucian looked away. "Yes, I did." Milo smiled slightly. "You are very different with me." Lucian was quiet for a moment. "Am I?" "With everyone else, you make them afraid to disappoint you." Lucian looked back at him. "And with you?" Milo thought about it. "You make me feel like I can try." For the first time, Lucian had no immediate answer. The moment was interrupted when Lucian's assistant arrived with another update. Julian was not backing down. He had contacted several people connected to Ashford Holdings and was preparing to challenge Milo's reputation publicly. This was no longer just a personal problem. It was becoming a battle that could affect Lucian's company and Milo's future. Milo looked at Lucian, expecting regret. Instead, Lucian simply asked, "Are you ready to face this?" Milo took a breath. A few days ago, he would have said no. But now he knew something had changed. He was still afraid. He was still uncertain. But he was no longer standing alone. "Yes," Milo answered. Lucian nodded. "Then we face it together." And as the city lights reflected across the glass walls of the mansion, Milo realized the most unexpected thing of all. The man who had the power to control every room he entered had chosen to stand beside him instead. But now they had to find out if that choice could survive when the entire world started watching. The days after the gallery event felt different for Milo Everhart. For the first time in a long time, He was not walking into rooms wondering if he belonged there. People who once ignored him now asked for his opinion. Critics who had doubted him now wanted to discuss his restoration methods. His work was finally being seen. But there was one thing Milo could not stop thinking about. Lucian Ashford had stood beside him when everyone else questioned him. He had defended him without hesitation. He had made Milo feel valued. And yet, somewhere in the back of his mind, a small question remained. How did Lucian know so much about him before they ever met? The question had been there since the first night at the mansion. The way Lucian said his name. The way he looked at Milo like he was not a stranger. The way certain employees became unusually quiet whenever Milo asked about the past. Milo tried to ignore it because trusting Lucian felt easier than being alone. But then he found something he was never supposed to see. It was late in the evening when Milo returned to the mansion after finishing work at the gallery. The house was quiet, and he noticed a folder left on the library table. At first, he thought it belonged to Lucian. He was about to walk away when he saw his own name written on the cover. Milo froze. Inside were documents, photographs, and notes about his career as an artist, his early exhibitions, his restoration projects, even details about paintings he had repaired years ago. It was not just information someone could find online. Someone had been following his work carefully. Someone had been paying attention long before the night he arrived at the mansion. You were not supposed to find that. Lucian's voice came from behind him. Milo turned slowly. The feeling in his chest changed instantly. The same man who had made him feel safe suddenly felt like someone standing behind a locked door. How long? Milo asked. Lucian did not pretend not to understand. Milo, how long did you know who I was? Lucian was silent. That silence hurt more than any answer. Before I came here? Milo asked. Before Julian betrayed me? Lucian looked away for a moment. Months. Milo felt his trust crack. Months. His voice was quiet, but the disappointment was obvious. You knew my name before I stepped out of that car. You knew about my work. You knew about my life. And you never told me. Lucian took a step forward. I was trying to protect you. Milo shook his head. That is what everyone says when they make a choice for me. The words hit Lucian harder than Milo expected. Because he understood them. He knew exactly why Milo was hurt. Lucian had spent weeks showing him that he respected his choices. But now Milo discovered that the beginning of their relationship was built on information Lucian kept hidden. There is something you need to understand, Lucian said. When I first heard about the agreement Julian made, I did not accept you because of it. I was already aware of your work. I had seen your restoration project years ago. Milo looked confused. Then why did you let me believe I was only here because of Julian's debt? Lucian lowered his eyes. For the first time, Milo saw hesitation from the man who always seemed certain. Because I knew if I told you the truth, you would think I had arranged everything. Milo did not answer. Because part of him knew Lucian was afraid. But another part of him still felt betrayed. You were right to worry, Milo said quietly. Because I am wondering if anything between us was real. Lucian's expression changed. Not anger. Not pride. Something closer to regret. Milo, everything after you arrived was real. But the beginning was not honest. That was the part neither of them could ignore. Lucian had protected him, supported him, believed in him. But he had also hidden the truth. And for someone who had already lost control of his own life, that secret mattered. The next morning, Milo decided to move into a small apartment near the gallery. He did not leave because he hated Lucian. He left because he needed to remember that his life belonged to him. Lucian did not stop him. He simply helped arrange the move and made sure Milo had everything he needed. That kindness somehow made the distance harder. At the door, Milo looked back. I do believe you wanted to help me. Lucian nodded. But, Milo swallowed. But I need to know that when you choose me, it is because you see me. Not because you already decided my story before I had a chance to tell it. After Milo left, Lucian stood alone in the mansion that had never felt empty until that moment. He had spent years protecting his company, his reputation, and his family name. But now he faced the one thing he could not control. Milo's trust. And Milo, walking through the city with his own keys in his hand again, realized something equally painful. Lucian Ashford might have been the first person who truly saw him. But he was also the first person who made him wonder if being seen was enough when the truth had been hidden from him. The first week after Milo Everhart moved out of the Ashford mansion felt strangely quiet. He had wanted independence. He had wanted space to think. He had wanted to prove that he was not staying because he needed Lucian Ashford's protection. But every morning, when Milo entered his small apartment near the gallery, he noticed something missing. Not the expensive furniture, not the enormous rooms, not the luxury. He missed the small things he never expected to matter. The quiet conversations in the library, the way Lucian remembered how he took his coffee, the way the entire world seemed to become less overwhelming when Lucian was nearby. Milo hated admitting it, but the distance did not make him feel free. It made him realize how much trust he had started to place in someone who had hurt him. Meanwhile, Lucian returned to the same mansion where he had spent years living alone. The same place where employees followed every instruction, where guests admired his success, and where nobody ever asked if he was tired. But now the silence felt different. Because for the first time, Lucian knew exactly what was missing. Milo. A few days later, a powerful storm hit the city. Heavy rain flooded several streets, and the gallery where Milo was working lost power. Milo stayed late to protect the restored pieces from the humidity, refusing to leave until everything was safe. He did not expect Lucian to appear. But when the doors opened and Lucian walked in carrying supplies, Milo froze. "What are you doing here?" Milo asked. Lucian looked around the dark gallery. "Making sure you get home safely." Milo frowned. "You could have sent someone." Lucian nodded. "I could have." That answer surprised him. Lucian was not pretending he needed to be there for business. He was there because he wanted to be. Together, they moved through the gallery, checking the artwork and making sure nothing was damaged. It was simple work, quiet work, the kind of moment they had never planned but somehow needed. When the storm grew stronger, Lucian offered to drive Milo home. Milo almost refused. Then he saw Lucian standing there without the usual confidence he carried in meetings. He looked tired. Not physically tired. Something deeper. Like he had been carrying something heavy for years. During the drive, neither of them spoke for a while. Finally, Milo asked, "Why did you really keep everything from me?" Lucian kept his eyes on the road. "Because I am used to protecting things before they break." Milo looked at him. Lucian continued, "My family built everything around control. Every mistake had consequences. Every weakness became something someone could use against you. I learned very early that the safest person to rely on was myself." Milo listened quietly. It was the first time Lucian had shown him something that was not carefully controlled. "And then you came along," Lucian said softly. "You were standing in my house, terrified. And you still worried about whether everyone else was uncomfortable. You had every reason to hate the world, but you were still kind." Milo looked away. "That does not erase what happened." "I know." Lucian answered immediately. "You should not have to forget your pain just because I had a reason." That was the moment Milo noticed the difference. Lucian was not asking him to forgive him. He was accepting that forgiveness had to be earned. Over the next few days, they slowly rebuilt what had been damaged. Lucian stopped making decisions for Milo without asking. Milo stopped pretending he was fine whenever he was struggling. When the gallery needed a difficult choice about the restoration project, Lucian did not speak first. He asked Milo what he thought. When investors questioned Milo's authority, Lucian supported him but allowed Milo to defend himself. Their relationship changed through small moments. Not promises. Not dramatic words. Actions. One evening, Milo returned a forgotten folder to Lucian's office and found him asleep at his desk. The man who controlled a global company looked completely exhausted. Milo quietly placed a blanket over his shoulders and left a note beside him reminding him to rest. The next morning, Lucian found it and kept the note inside his wallet. It was a small thing, but for Lucian, it meant more than any expensive gift he had ever received. Someone cared about him without wanting anything in return. For Milo, it was the first time he understood that Lucian's greatest fear was not losing power. It was losing the few people who ever saw him as more than a name. But their fragile peace did not last. One morning, Milo arrived at the gallery and found reporters waiting outside. The story about Julian was spreading again, but this time it was connected to Lucian's company. Someone wanted the world to believe Milo was the reason Ashford Holdings was facing trouble. Milo looked at the cameras, then at the message on his phone. Julian had made his next move. And this time, it was not just about destroying Milo's reputation. It was about forcing Lucian to choose between his company and the person he had finally allowed himself to care about. The morning of the Ashford Holdings press conference began like any other important day. Milo Everhard arrived early at the gallery, carrying his notes, his restoration plans, and the quiet confidence he had slowly rebuilt. A few months ago, he would have walked into a room full of powerful people and wondered if he belonged there. Now, he knew his work mattered. He knew Lucian believed in him. And more importantly, he had started believing in himself again. But that confidence disappeared the moment he saw the headlines. They were everywhere. On phones, on tablets, on news screens across the building. Ashford Ayre's secret arrangement exposed. Milo stopped walking. His eyes moved across the article, and his heart sank. Attached to the story was a private document. A contract. His name was on it. Lucian's name was on it. And the way it was presented made it look like Milo had entered Lucian's life for money, status, and protection. The article claimed Milo had always known about the arrangement, that he had used Lucian's influence to rebuild his career, that every opportunity he received was part of a carefully planned agreement. It was the exact opposite of the truth. But truth was not what people saw first. People saw the documents. They saw the headlines. They saw the story someone wanted them to believe. The room that once welcomed Milo suddenly felt colder. Conversations stopped when he walked by. People who had praised his work now looked uncertain. Some avoided his eyes. Others looked at him with quiet judgment. Milo tried to focus on the restoration project, but every whispered comment reminded him of the same fear. That no matter what he achieved, people would always believe he only got there because of Lucian. Then Julian appeared. He arrived at the gallery with the confidence of someone who believed he had already won. "You should have known this would happen," Julian said quietly. Milo looked at him with disbelief. "You did this." Julian did not deny it. "I told the truth people wanted to hear." Milo felt something inside him break. Not because Julian had betrayed him again. He already knew what kind of person Julian was. What hurt was that the story was believable because of the one thing Milo had tried so hard to escape. Someone else controlling his future. Before Milo could respond, Lucian arrived. The entire room changed when he entered. Conversations stopped. Executives stepped aside. Everyone waited to see what the most powerful man in the room would do. Milo looked at him and felt a small, painful hope appear. This was the moment. This was when Lucian would tell everyone the truth. But Lucian did not speak immediately. He looked at the documents. He looked at the reporters. He looked at Milo. And for a few seconds, he said nothing. Those few seconds felt endless. Milo felt the same fear he had felt the night he discovered Lucian's secret. The fear that he had trusted someone who could never truly choose him. He looked away first, because he could not handle the possibility of being disappointed again. Lucian's silence was not because he doubted Milo. It was because he understood the situation was more complicated than a simple denial. The documents were real. The signatures were real. Someone had taken pieces of the truth and built a false story around them. A careless response could damage Milo's reputation even more. But Milo did not know that. All he saw was hesitation. And hesitation felt painfully familiar. Later, when the reporters left and the gallery became quiet again, Milo stood alone among the artwork he had spent months restoring. Paintings that had been damaged. Paintings that had survived because someone believed they were worth saving. He wondered if people saw him the same way. Damaged. Complicated. Too much work. He held the contract in his hands and felt the weight of every doubt he had tried to overcome. Lucian found him there. "Milo." Milo did not turn around. "Do not tell me you will fix this." His voice was calm, but the hurt underneath was impossible to hide. "I am tired of being something people have to explain." Lucian stayed silent. Milo finally looked at him. "I believed you were different. I believed you saw me as a person." Lucian's expression changed. "I do." "Then why did it feel like I was standing there alone?" That question had no easy answer. Lucian had protected companies from disasters. He had negotiated with people far more dangerous than rumors. But standing in front of Milo, he realized the hardest thing he had ever faced was proving that his choice was real. Milo walked away before Lucian could answer. Not because he stopped caring, because caring was exactly why it hurt so much. And as Milo left the gallery, one thought followed him. Maybe the person who finally made him feel chosen was also the person who would break his trust again. Behind him, Lucian looked at the contract, the headlines, and the damage created by Julian's plan. For the first time in years, power was not enough. Money was not enough. Reputation was not enough. If he wanted to protect Milo now, he would have to do something far more difficult. He would have to show the world, without hiding behind his name, exactly who Milo Everhart was. The day of the final Ashford Holdings presentation arrived with the entire business world watching. Milo Everhart stood outside the conference room doors, holding his notes in one hand and trying to steady himself. A few weeks earlier, he would have believed that proving his talent was enough. He would have believed that hard work could silence every rumor. But now he understood something painful. Sometimes people did not reject the truth because they could not see it. They rejected it because a different story was easier to believe. Inside the room, executives, investors, and reporters waited. Julian was already there, confident and surrounded by people who believed his version of events. The documents had done exactly what he wanted. They had turned Milo from a respected artist into someone the public questioned. Someone who looked like he had gained everything through his connection to Lucian Ashford. Milo walked in quietly. He did not lower his head. He did not apologize for existing. But he could feel the weight of every judgment around him. Then Lucian entered. Everyone expected the powerful CEO to take control immediately. They expected a carefully prepared statement protecting the company. Instead, Lucian did something unexpected. He walked past the executives, past the reporters, and stopped. Beside Milo. Not in front of him. Not above him. Beside him. That single choice changed the entire room. Before anyone discusses this company, Lucian said calmly, we need to discuss the person who has been unfairly judged. The room became silent. Julian smiled slightly. Lucian, I think everyone understands what happened. The documents are clear. Lucian looked at him. Yes, the documents are clear. That is exactly why we are here. He placed a folder on the table. Inside were records that had been carefully collected over the past several days. Payment records, communication records, original versions of agreements. Evidence showing that Julian had manipulated the information to create a false story. The arrangement had never been what Julian claimed. He had hidden his own financial decisions and used Milo's name to protect himself. Lucian did not attack him. He simply showed the truth. You wanted people to believe Milo was chosen because he had something to gain, Lucian said. But the reality is that he was the person who lost the most. The room remained quiet as the evidence was reviewed. The same people who had whispered about Milo now looked uncomfortable. The same people who had questioned his talent now saw the truth. Julian tried to defend himself. You are only doing this because you care about him. Lucian paused. For a moment, everyone waited. Then Lucian answered honestly. Yes. Milo looked at him, surprised. Lucian continued. At the beginning, circumstances brought Milo into my life. There were agreements. There were complications. I will not pretend otherwise. His voice softened. But everything after that was his choice. His work. His character. His kindness. None of that belonged to any contract. Those words affected Milo more than the evidence ever could. Because Lucian was not trying to erase the difficult beginning. He was acknowledging it. He was proving that what mattered was what they built afterward. Lucian then made the decision that shocked everyone in the room. He announced that Milo's restoration project would no longer be managed as part of Ashford Holdings' internal collection. Instead, Milo would receive independent recognition as the lead artist behind the project, completely separate from Lucian's personal influence. It was a risk. It meant Lucian could no longer control how people viewed the connection between them. But that was exactly the point. He was giving Milo his own name back. The room slowly changed. The whispers disappeared. Milo was no longer the person who arrived at the mansion because someone else made a decision for him. He was the artist whose work had earned respect. Julian's reputation collapsed under the weight of his own choices. The people who once trusted him now questioned his honesty, his business decisions, and his credibility. He had tried to make Milo look like someone who used others, but the truth revealed who had actually done that. After the meeting ended, Milo stood outside the building, watching the city move around him. For so long, he had wanted someone to prove he was worth choosing. But now he understood something important. Lucian had not given him value. Milo had always had it. Lucian had simply been the first person powerful enough to make others see it. You did not have to risk your company for me, Milo said quietly when Lucian joined him. Lucian looked toward the city. I know. Milo waited for more. Lucian continued. That is why I wanted to do it. For the first time since the truth had come out, Milo smiled. The pain was still there. The questions were still there. But the trust between them was no longer built on assumptions. It was built on choices. As they stood together outside the building, Milo realized the person who once arrived at Lucian's mansion with no control over his future was no longer the same person. He had found his voice. He had found his worth. And somehow, along the way, he had found someone who chose to stand beside him even when the entire world was watching. But one question remained. Now that Milo no longer needed protection, would Lucian still choose to stay? 6 months later, Milo Everhart stood in the same mansion where his life had changed forever. But this time, he was not standing at the entrance with a small suitcase and fear in his heart. He was arriving with his own name, his own success, and his own choice. The mansion no longer felt like a place where someone else decided his future. It felt like a place where he was welcomed. The greatest difference was that Milo no longer needed it to survive. He had built a career that belonged to him. His restoration work had gained international recognition, and the gallery that once questioned whether he deserved his position now displayed his name proudly beside his projects. He had finally become the person he always was, even before anyone noticed. Lucian Ashford had changed too. The man who once believed every problem could be solved with control had learned that love was not something to manage. It was something to protect by giving another person freedom. He no longer made decisions for Milo without asking. He no longer stood between Milo and the world. He stood beside him. On the evening of Milo's newest exhibition opening, Lucian watched from the crowd as Milo spoke about his work. The room was filled with people who once doubted him. But Milo was not the same person who had entered those rooms before. He spoke with confidence. He spoke with pride. He did not need anyone to prove he belonged. When the presentation ended, applause filled the gallery. Lucian smiled quietly, not because Milo had become successful, but because he knew how hard Milo had worked to believe in himself. Later that night, they walked through the quiet halls of the mansion. Milo stopped near the entrance where he had first arrived. He looked at the place where he once stood feeling like he had lost everything. "I remember this night," Milo said. Lucian looked at him. "So do I." Milo smiled softly. "Back then, I thought this place was the end of my life." Lucian waited. "But it was actually the beginning of the part where I finally learned I had a choice." The words meant more to Lucian than Milo realized, because that was the lesson both of them had learned. Milo had learned that being chosen by someone else was not the same as choosing himself. Lucian had learned that loving someone did not mean holding on to them. It meant trusting them enough to stay by their own decision. Lucian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Milo looked curious. Inside was a document. For a moment, Milo froze. A contract. The sight brought back memories of everything that had hurt him. But when he opened it, he saw something different. It was not an agreement controlling his future. It was a simple statement that removed every obligation between them. No conditions. No expectations. No debt. Lucian looked at him. "I wanted you to have proof that nothing connects you to me except what you choose." Milo looked down at the paper, then back at Lucian. "You are giving me the option to leave." Lucian nodded. "Yes." There was no fear hidden behind his words. No attempt to convince him. Just honesty. "Because if you stay, I want it to be because you want this life. Not because someone decided it for you." Milo felt the weight of those words. Months ago, he had arrived at this place because someone else made a choice about his life. Now, standing in the same place, he had the power to make his own. Milo folded the document and placed it back in Lucian's hand. "Then let me choose." Lucian looked at him. "And what do you choose?" Milo smiled. "I choose the person who finally gave me the freedom to choose." For the first time, Lucian allowed himself to stop being the powerful man everyone expected him to be. He simply stood there as someone who had been chosen. Not for his money, not for his name, not for what he could provide, but for who he was. The next morning, the same road that once carried Milo to the mansion as someone without control over his future carried him away again. But everything was different. He was not escaping. He was not being delivered. He was going home. And beside him was the person who had learned that the greatest thing he could give Milo was not protection, but the freedom to choose him. What began with a broken promise ended with something far more valuable. Two people who finally understood that real love was not about being owned. It was about being chosen again and again.